The courtroom was full that morning. People sat quietly, waiting for the next case to begin. The sound of papers shuffling and whispers filled the air. Judge Cynthia Harper entered, her black robe flowing behind her. She was known for being fair but firm. Her reputation was strong, and she had spent years earning respect in the legal world. She took her seat behind the tall wooden bench and looked over the case file in front of her. This was a simple case, a routine hearing, but it would soon become unforgettable. The doors swung open, and Officer Daniel Walker entered. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his police uniform. His badge gleamed under the courtroom lights. He walked in with confidence, but something about his attitude seemed off. He barely acknowledged the judge as he made his way to the witness stand. "Officer Walker, please state your name and position for the record," the court clerk said. The officer leaned back in his seat, barely looking up. "Yeah, Daniel Walker, police officer," he muttered, his tone flat and uninterested. A few people in the courtroom raised their eyebrows. Judge Harper didn't react, but she noticed his tone immediately. She had seen this kind of behavior before. She cleared her throat. "Officer Walker, in this courtroom, we follow procedure. Please speak clearly and respectfully." The officer gave a short nod, but his expression didn't change. He barely looked at Judge Harper. Instead, he glanced around the room as if he had better things to do. The defense attorney and prosecutor exchanged a quick glance. They could sense the tension. This was not the first time an officer had acted this way toward Judge Harper, but it was rare to see such blatant disrespect. Judge Harper continued, "You are here as a witness in this case. I expect you to give your full attention. Do you understand, Officer Walker?" He sighed and crossed his arms. "Yeah, sure," he said casually, as if he were talking to a friend instead of a judge. A quiet gasp spread through the room. A judge was the highest authority in a courtroom. It was unheard of for someone to respond so casually, especially an officer. Judge Harper paused, letting the silence settle. She had faced challenges before, but something about this officer's attitude felt different. He wasn't just being rude. He was testing her. She folded her hands and spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "Officer Walker, this is a court of law, not a casual conversation. You will address me properly. Is that clear?" The officer smirked slightly but nodded. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, but the way he said it made it clear. He still wasn't taking her seriously. The courtroom remained silent, waiting to see how Judge Harper would respond next. Little did they know, her next words would change everything. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Everyone was watching Judge Cynthia Harper closely. They knew that she was known for her calm demeanor, but they weren't sure how she would handle Officer Walker's disrespect. Most judges would have reprimanded him right away, but Judge Harper was different. She sat quietly behind her bench, her hands folded in front of her. The silence in the room stretched out, making everyone feel uneasy. Officer Walker sat on the witness stand, still with his arms crossed, looking bored. He seemed to think that his position as a police officer somehow gave him the right to treat the judge with disrespect. Judge Harper didn't rush to speak. She took a moment, as though choosing her words carefully. Her calm presence was one of the reasons she had earned so much respect over the years. People knew she could handle difficult situations with grace, and now they were about to see it firsthand. "Officer Walker," she said softly, her voice steady but firm, "I understand that you may feel comfortable in this setting, but I want to remind you that you are in a courtroom, and here, respect for the court is not optional. It is required." The officer didn't respond right away. His eyes flickered for just a moment, but he quickly looked away, staring down at his shoes. Perhaps he didn't expect her to speak to him like this. After all, most people in his life had let him get away with acting however he pleased. But Judge Harper wasn't like the others. She continued, "I know you are used to a position of authority in your role as a police officer, but in this courtroom, I am the one in charge. You will follow the rules, or I will have no choice but to ask you to leave." The courtroom was silent again. Even the defense attorney seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to step in. It was clear that this was an uncomfortable moment. But Judge Harper remained calm, not letting the pressure get to her. She had learned long ago that responding with anger or frustration would only make things worse. Officer Walker shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. He glanced around the room as if looking for support, but everyone remained silent, watching the exchange unfold. He sighed loudly, as though he had been put out. All right," he muttered, finally lifting his head and meeting her eyes for the first time. "I understand, Your Honor. I'll try to be more respectful." Judge Harper nodded, but her eyes never left his. "Good, I expect nothing less." She gave him a moment to settle before continuing with the proceedings. Her voice softened again as she turned her attention back to the case. But Officer Walker seemed to feel the weight of her words. The playful smirk from earlier was gone. For the first time, he seemed to realize that Judge Harper was not someone to be taken lightly. In that brief exchange, he had learned something very important. Respect was not negotiable. The rest of the courtroom watched in silence, amazed at how effortlessly Judge Harper had taken control of the situation. She had handled the officer's disrespect not with anger, but with a quiet authority that commanded attention. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. What had started as an ordinary case quickly turned into something much more. Everyone in the room could feel the change. There was no longer the usual calm hum of people flipping through papers or shuffling in their seats. Instead, the air was thick with anticipation, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Officer Walker had tried to brush off the judge's words, but Judge Cynthia Harper's calm response had put him in his place. The tension was far from over. People were now looking at each other, exchanging glances, unsure of what was coming. The defense attorney leaned over to the prosecutor and whispered something, though it was too quiet to hear. The prosecutor nodded, but neither seemed willing to break the silence. Both of them were unsure whether to speak up or wait for the next move from Judge Harper. The court clerk, who had been quietly scribbling notes in the corner, glanced nervously at the judge. She was used to quiet proceedings, but this moment felt different. It was clear that Officer Walker's behavior wasn't typical for someone in his position. Everyone knew it. Even the clerk could feel the tension building. There were a few whispers from the people in the gallery, most of whom were spectators attending the trial out of personal interest. It was rare for them to witness such a public confrontation between an officer and a judge. Usually, the law professionals acted respectfully toward each other, understanding the importance of maintaining decorum. But today, something was different. From the corner of the room, a young law clerk, who had been observing everything closely, felt a sense of pride. She was a recent graduate and had just started working with Judge Harper. She had been trained to stay quiet, to observe and learn. But seeing how Judge Harper handled the officer's disrespect filled her with admiration. It was clear that the judge wasn't afraid to stand her ground, even against someone as powerful as an officer of the law. The young clerk couldn't help but smile slightly. She knew that one day she would be in a similar position, and she wanted to be just like Judge Harper, calm, confident, and in control. Meanwhile, Officer Walker was still sitting in the witness stand, his jaw clenched and his eyes downcast. The earlier arrogance in his posture had melted away. He was no longer acting like the person who thought they could get away with anything. Instead, he looked like someone who had just been reminded of the importance of respect, something he had taken for granted for too long. The room remained quiet as Judge Harper adjusted her glasses and prepared to continue the case. She didn't need to raise her voice or make a grand statement. She simply did what she always did. She maintained order. Her presence alone was enough to command the room. As the courtroom went back to its usual rhythm, the young law clerk couldn't help but feel that today had been a turning point. This moment would stay with her forever, reminding her that justice wasn't just about the law. It was also about how those in power treated each other, especially when no one was watching. The courtroom settled into a strange silence after Judge Cynthia Harper had addressed Officer Walker. It was clear that things were not going to continue as usual. Officer Walker seemed uncomfortable, and the people in the room could feel the shift in energy. What had started as a regular hearing had turned into a moment of tension, and no one was sure how it would end. Judge Harper looked at the officer with steady eyes. Her calm demeanor remained, but everyone could sense the seriousness in her gaze. She was no longer going to let his disrespect slide. "Officer Walker," she said, her voice clear and firm, "I have given you a chance to adjust your behavior. I understand that sometimes people make mistakes, but there comes a point where enough is enough. You are here to provide testimony, not to undermine the authority of this court." Her words were simple, yet powerful. The tone of her voice made it clear that she wasn't joking. Officer Walker had pushed her patience to its limit, and now it was time for him to understand the consequences. Judge Harper paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. She didn't need to raise her voice. The room was hanging on her every word, and everyone could feel the weight of what she was about to say next. "I will not allow any behavior that disrupts the proceedings of this court," Judge Harper continued. "This is a place where justice is served, and everyone, regardless of who they are, must follow the rules. If you cannot show the proper respect, I will have no choice but to remove you from the witness stand and have you escorted out of this courtroom." The room was quiet as the judge's words echoed through the space. There was no anger in her voice, but the authority in her tone was undeniable. It was the kind of authority that didn't need to be shouted or forced. It was simply understood. For a moment, Officer Walker didn't respond. He looked down, his face reddening slightly. He hadn't expected Judge Harper to stand her ground so firmly. Most judges would have been quick to end the conversation with a stern warning, but she had taken a different approach. She had reminded him of his role in the courtroom, and that no one, no matter their position, was above the law. The defense attorney glanced at the prosecutor, both of them unsure how to react. They had never seen Officer Walker in such a vulnerable position. The officer had always been confident, sometimes even cocky, in the past. But now, in front of Judge Harper, it was clear that he was the one who was out of his depth. Judge Harper's eyes softened slightly as she looked at the officer. "I'm giving you one more chance, Officer Walker. Respect the court, and we can move forward with this hearing. Disrespect me again, and I will have no choice but to take action." The officer nodded, though it was obvious that he was still feeling embarrassed. He had never expected to be confronted like this, especially not by a judge. He swallowed his pride, realizing that this was not a battle he could win. "Yes, Your Honor," he muttered quietly, finally acknowledging her authority. Judge Harper didn't respond immediately, but gave him a small nod, signaling that the issue was now closed. The courtroom seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, and the proceedings continued. Officer Walker was now more aware of the judge's power, and the rest of the room knew that they had witnessed something important: the importance of respect, no matter who you were or what your position in life might be. The silence in the courtroom hung thick after Officer Walker muttered a reluctant apology. He had tried to brush off his behavior, but it was clear that Judge Cynthia Harper was not about to let it slide. The energy in the room had shifted from tension to anticipation. People were waiting to see what would happen next. Would the officer continue to challenge the judge, or would he finally accept his place? Judge Harper remained calm, but everyone could feel the power of her presence. She didn't need to shout or raise her voice to get her point across. Her words were measured and strong. She had already shown Officer Walker that she wouldn't tolerate disrespect, but now it was time to say something that would leave a lasting impact. She took a deep breath, then slowly adjusted her glasses. "Officer Walker," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I've given you the benefit of the doubt, but you need to understand that your position as an officer of the law is not an excuse for dismissing others. This courtroom is about fairness, justice, and respect, and I expect every person in this room to uphold those values." Her words rang through the courtroom, each one deliberate, each one meaningful. There was no anger in her tone, but there was a quiet strength that demanded attention. It was clear that she wasn't just talking to Officer Walker. She was speaking to everyone in the room, reminding them of the rules of respect and honor in a courtroom. Respect isn't something that can be given or taken away depending on who is in front of you. Judge Harper continued. Respect is a fundamental part of every individual. It doesn't matter if you're an officer, a judge, or a witness. It's about understanding that we all have a role to play in ensuring that justice is served. The words hung in the air as Judge Harper paused, allowing everyone in the room to take them in. Officer Walker shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't speak. He didn't dare interrupt the judge now. He had learned that lesson already. I am not here to show favoritism or to be treated differently because of my position, she went on. I expect you, Officer Walker, to follow the same rules as everyone else. I expect you to show respect not just to me, but to every person in this courtroom. The law applies to everyone, no matter who you are. As she spoke, Judge Harper's eyes never left Officer Walker. She wasn't angry. She wasn't frustrated. She was simply stating the truth. Her confidence was unwavering, and it had a powerful effect on everyone in the room. The defense attorney and prosecutor exchanged looks, clearly impressed by Judge Harper's handling of the situation. The young law clerk in the corner, who had been watching with wide eyes, felt a swell of admiration. This was the kind of judge she aspired to be, someone who didn't need to shout to command respect, but who earned it through wisdom, integrity, and courage. After a long pause, Judge Harper finished, her voice softening slightly. Officer Walker, you are a part of this system, just as much as anyone else, and I expect you to act accordingly. For the first time since the hearing had begun, Officer Walker met her gaze directly. He didn't speak, but the way he held himself told the story. He knew that he had been put in his place, and for the first time, he was finally beginning to understand the true meaning of respect. The room was silent, hanging on every word from Judge Cynthia Harper. Officer Daniel Walker had been put in his place, but the battle wasn't over. His face reddened slightly as he sat in the witness stand, shifting uncomfortably. The calm authority of Judge Harper had taken him by surprise, but he wasn't the type to back down easily. He still felt the sting of being publicly called out in front of everyone. For a moment, he tried to hold his composure, looking down at the table in front of him. But then, he straightened up and cleared his throat, a small but deliberate gesture. He wasn't about to let the judge get the last word. Your Honor, Officer Walker began, his voice low but edged with frustration. I just want to make it clear that I didn't mean any disrespect. I was just getting comfortable. His words were casual, almost dismissive, as if trying to downplay the seriousness of the situation. Judge Harper didn't flinch. She had heard this kind of deflection before, and she wasn't going to let him brush it off so easily. Instead, she raised an eyebrow and looked at him with a calm but piercing gaze. Officer Walker, she said firmly, getting comfortable in a courtroom is not an excuse for behaving in a way that undermines the dignity of this court. Her voice didn't rise, but there was no mistaking the sharpness of her words. Your role as a witness today is to be clear, honest, and respectful. That is the standard for everyone here, no exceptions. There was a brief pause, and for a moment, it seemed like Officer Walker might reconsider his approach. But instead, he leaned back in his seat slightly, his arms crossing over his chest once again. He couldn't seem to let go of the idea that his position as an officer somehow meant he could be above the rules. I understand what you're saying. Officer Walker responded slowly, his voice still thick with a hint of defiance. But honestly, I think you're overreacting. I've been in courts plenty of times. People joke around. They don't make a big deal out of it. Judge Harper's expression remained unchanged. This is not a joke, officer. The law is not something to be taken lightly, and neither is the role of those who serve it. Your position requires a level of professionalism and respect that extends beyond your uniform. The officer's jaw clenched, but he held back the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Deep down, he knew Judge Harper was right, but his pride was getting the best of him. He had never been spoken to like this, especially not by someone in a position like hers. In the courtroom, everyone could sense the shift in the air. The defense attorney's eyes flickered nervously, while the prosecutor's expression remained unreadable. The young law clerk standing at the back, watching intently, could feel the tension growing between the officer and the judge. She had always heard about the importance of respect in the courtroom, but now she was witnessing it firsthand. It was one thing to learn the rules, but it was another to see them enforced with such authority. Officer Walker fell silent for a moment, clearly fighting with himself. Finally, after a long pause, he let out a heavy sigh and muttered, "I understand, Your Honor." But his voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. There was no doubt that Judge Harper had won this round. The silence in the courtroom stretched for what seemed like an eternity after Officer Daniel Walker finally muttered an apology. Judge Cynthia Harper had shown immense patience, and now it was clear that the officer's defiant attitude had softened, even if just a little. His earlier bravado had been replaced by an uncomfortable acknowledgement of his mistake, but the shift wasn't over. As the courtroom waited for the next steps, Officer Walker couldn't shake the feeling of being humbled. He had spent years in law enforcement, where his uniform and badge often commanded respect without question. But here, in this courtroom, he had been forced to confront the reality that respect had to be earned, not demanded. And it wasn't something that came from a badge. It came from treating people, regardless of their position, with fairness and dignity. He adjusted his posture, now sitting up straighter on the witness stand. The earlier slouch was gone, and he seemed more aware of his surroundings. The way Judge Harper had spoken to him, firmly yet calmly, had an impact that he couldn't ignore. For the first time in a long while, he felt small. Judge Harper, however, didn't show any sign of triumph. She wasn't there to make him feel small. She was there to uphold the law. And she was doing just that. With her quiet authority, she had reminded everyone in the room, including Officer Walker, that the court was a place of respect and fairness. The young law clerk at the back of the room watched this exchange with growing admiration. She had seen how Judge Harper handled the situation without raising her voice, without losing her cool. It was a lesson in leadership and respect that the clerk would carry with her forever. She felt lucky to be working under such a judge, not just for her legal knowledge, but for her ability to inspire respect without ever needing to demand it. Officer Walker finally lifted his head, meeting Judge Harper's gaze for the first time since the confrontation. It wasn't the same defiant stare from before. This time, there was a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "I'm sorry for my behavior earlier, Your Honor," he said, his voice lower than before, but sincere. "I've never been spoken to like that before. And to be honest, I didn't think it was necessary. But I see now. I see that you were right." Judge Harper nodded, her face softening slightly. "It's important to remember, officer, that no one is above the rules. Not you, not me, not anyone. We all have a role to play, and part of that is showing respect to each other." She paused before adding, "I'm glad you understand." The officer nodded, his shoulders finally relaxing. The tension in the room that had been building for what seemed like hours was finally starting to dissipate. The mood in the courtroom had shifted. The earlier discomfort was slowly replaced by an air of quiet respect. Everyone in the room had witnessed something important that day. It wasn't just a lesson for Officer Walker. It was a reminder for everyone in the courtroom that respect, no matter who you were, was the foundation of any true form of justice. And while Officer Walker had been humbled by the experience, Judge Harper had emerged as an unshakable symbol of fairness, reinforcing that respect for the law and each other was the only way forward. After Officer Walker had apologized and the tension in the courtroom began to ease, the atmosphere shifted. The room, which had been so tense and filled with unease moments before, now felt lighter. The respect in the room had been restored. Even the defense attorney and prosecutor, who had been quietly observing the exchange, seemed to relax slightly, as if acknowledging that something important had just happened. Judge Cynthia Harper gave the officer one last look before returning to her work, her expression calm but firm. She didn't need to make a big show of the moment. Her actions and words had already set the tone for what was expected in her courtroom. Respect for the law, respect for each other, and most importantly, respect for the role of the judge. She was in charge, and she expected those who entered her courtroom to understand that without the need for further reminders. The officer, still visibly humbled, nodded and straightened up. He had learned an important lesson, one that would likely stay with him for a long time. Judge Harper's words had cut through his arrogance, leaving him with a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve not just the law, but also the people. He had always thought of respect as something that came naturally because of his uniform, but now he understood that it was something that had to be earned through actions and attitudes, not just through authority. As the proceedings continued, the energy in the room seemed to change once more. The earlier unease had shifted into something else, respect and admiration for Judge Harper's handling of the situation. People could feel it. Even the usual hum of whispers and quiet exchanges seemed to settle into a respectful silence. And then, almost as if on cue, something unexpected happened. A soft clap broke through the silence. At first, it was just one person, someone from the back of the room. But then, another person joined in, followed by another, and soon, the whole courtroom was clapping. The applause wasn't loud or boisterous. It wasn't a show of rebellion or defiance. It was a quiet but powerful acknowledgement of what had just taken place. The young law clerk, who had been watching with admiration from the back of the room, smiled softly as she joined in. She felt proud to be there, witnessing this moment of justice in its truest form. She could see that this wasn't just about the officer or the judge. It was about everyone in the room recognizing the importance of respect and the strength that came from standing up for what was right. Officer Walker sat in his seat, clearly uncomfortable at first, but as the applause continued, something inside him shifted. He wasn't angry or embarrassed anymore. He realized that the applause wasn't mocking him. It wasn't about his failure. It was about the message Judge Harper had sent. That respect for the law and for others was more important than anything else. Finally, the clapping began to fade, and the courtroom returned to its usual quiet hum. The moment had passed, but it was clear that something important had happened. Everyone in that room, whether they had applauded or not, knew that they had just witnessed a powerful reminder of the role respect played in the pursuit of justice. Judge Harper returned her attention to the case, her presence now even stronger than before. She didn't need to say anything more. Her actions had spoken volumes, and her leadership had set the stage for what true respect in a courtroom looked like. As the courtroom returned to normal, the proceedings continued. But something had changed. The atmosphere was no longer just filled with the usual tension of a courtroom. It now had a layer of respect, a deeper understanding that had been earned in the moments before. Everyone had witnessed a powerful display of authority, calm, and fairness from Judge Cynthia Harper, and it left a lasting impact. Officer Walker sat quietly in the witness stand, his posture straighter than before. He had been humbled, but it was clear that he was taking the situation to heart. He had learned something important that day, not just about his role as a law enforcement officer, but about how he treated others. His previous arrogance had been replaced with a more thoughtful demeanor. He had been shown that respect wasn't just something given because of a badge. It had to be earned through how one acted, not how one was perceived. The rest of the courtroom had felt the change too. The defense attorney and the prosecutor had returned to their notes, but there was a noticeable shift in how they interacted with each other and with the judge. The earlier tension had dissipated, replaced with a quiet acknowledgement of the professionalism Judge Harper had demonstrated. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about the way things were handled, with dignity, grace, and fairness. The young law clerk watched everything unfold from the back of the room, taking mental notes of the way Judge Harper had handled the situation. This was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She had seen firsthand how a judge could command respect without having to demand it. The judge had led by example, showing that true authority came not from power, but from the ability to stay calm and remain steadfast in the face of challenge. It was the kind of leadership that inspired, not intimidated. The clerk knew she would have to work hard to earn that same respect in the future. But for now, she was content to learn from someone who had set the standard for professionalism and authority. Judge Harper's leadership had shown her the way. Outside the courtroom, news of the incident began to spread. People started talking about it, not just because of the confrontation, but because of the way Judge Harper had handled it. There was no drama or grand gestures. She didn't yell, and she didn't try to humiliate Officer Walker. She simply stated the truth and let her actions speak for themselves. Soon, the story went viral. It wasn't about the officer's mistake, but about how a woman in a position of power had managed to restore respect without resorting to anger or unnecessary conflict. Her composure and the way she addressed the officer became a symbol of the kind of leadership that everyone, whether in the legal world or beyond, should strive for. As the day went on, Judge Harper went about her work as she always did, methodical, fair, and unwavering. She knew that this moment would be remembered, but she didn't let it distract her. She had done her job. And in doing so, she had made a lasting impression on everyone in the room that day. An impression that would be remembered long after the case was over. The lesson was clear. Respect is earned, not given, and it is the foundation of true justice.